to Radio Omnicore episode 32. Today in studio we welcome back Neil Bierbaum. Neil is an executive coach, author and mindfulness expert, and Hilton today will be co-hosting in his usual spot. So welcome back, Neil. It's so wonderful to host you again. I was just checking out that we did episode 23 with you in 2018. Crazy that it was so long ago, but it doesn't feel that long.
Yeah, it feels like just yesterday. And thanks so much for inviting me back.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you and Hilton in his usual seat.
Hello.
There. And you have been so incredibly busy since we met. We did a touch base, which was also really nice that you contacted me to update me a little bit with what you've been doing. And I can't believe how many books you've written and things. And it was just an opportunity to really connect with you and hear a little bit more around what you've done. So welcome. We're excited to learn a bit more specifically around personal effectiveness today. But I'm sure the journey will be this. I have so many questions to ask you. In fact, this episode, I asked my team what questions. If you were to sit with a personal effectiveness expert, what would you ask them? So I have many people who've asked me to ask you questions. So we weren't short of questions at all, because it is a real challenge and something that we see in coaching all the time. This person's talented, but they're not delivering. And so I'm really excited to explore that more with you today.
That's great. I look forward to it.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about what made you go on this book writing spree.
Yeah, I think it was always going to be a writing journey for me when I started out my career. In fact, I started as a journalist, and that came about through, I guess, just being a bit of a seeker. My father had sent me off to be an accountant, told me that was the only possibility in life. And when I got a bursary and started studying and did a year's articles, and I was like, this is the last thing on earth I want to be doing. So I left that, finished my degree, and went traveling the world, and ended up on that journey getting into journalism, and had a really great experience there. I loved writing, found that I had a bit of a talent for it, and so things went really nicely for me there. And yet a lot of the stuff I was covering wasn't really where I wanted it to be. I was always interested in performance, human performance, meaning, purpose, and trying to discover more of that. And during that time, a magazine came across my desk that pointed out coaching. And there were three guys. I don't know if you remember Style magazine in the old days.
Right.
There was an article in that and about these guys who called themselves coaches. And I was like, that sounds like where I want to be. And so I went and discovered coach training. That was in the early days, and did my coach training and worked as a coach. And throughout it all, I've always stayed in line with the online trend and done blogging and writing, always with the view to producing books and pulling it all together in some written form at some stage. So for me, a lot of the coaching was kind of like my research phase. It was like, okay, one of these days I'm going to get back to this. And then how these particular books came about was kind of a surprise almost. I had, as you know, written the Practical Mindfulness book, done the online course, and then thought, I've got to put my coaching program online, because I was seeing a lot of traffic on the website where people are asking about coaching and the costs of coaching, and it's often prohibitive. It's not covered by medical aid and those kind of things. You get corporate sponsored coaching, but for private individuals and even many corporates, there's certain levels where they can't do the coaching because it just gets so expensive. So I decided then to record the stuff. So I did it to the video, and then all the exercises, which were well-written pieces, covering the content, supporting notes, and then the exercises that I wrote. That when I put the course together, these became available as the downloadable PDFs. There was also an audio version of all the written content. And then I thought to myself, as one does, it's time to repurpose all this content and see what I can do with it. And I thought, it'll just be a quick little ebook. And then I looked at the content and I realized this is a massive amount of content. And if I link it up together, it'll make a really nice handbook, self-coaching handbook, because also some people don't want to do the online. They prefer a physical product. And I looked at it and I said, well, not everybody wants to do the coaching exercises. What if I take that out? What will I have? And then there was the basic book, and then I realized there's a life version of this and the executive version. and, of just the core content that people can use as an accompaniment to whatever program they're doing, a coaching program or any personal development or leadership development program. And then there's the actual self-coaching handbook version. So I ended up with these 4 books. I hope I'm making it clear what they are. We can explain it a bit more again just now. And so I think it was like over 1,000 pages, 300,000 words. What I thought was going to be a couple of weeks ended up taking 3 or 4 months. Took a lot of my time and energy, but I managed to get it done. And so here they are now.
Sure, that's quite quick for 4 books.
Yeah, I guess a lot of the content was done already. And yeah, I guess that's the one thing I find is I can write a lot. I don't have a problem with writer's block. If I sit down, if you give me 10 hours a day, I'll write for 10 hours. It's like, I love it.
That is a real art, because I find writing quite a grind.
Yeah, I think most people do. I mean, that's a real... It might be useful to think of kind of personal effectiveness, just your own discipline of how do you do that? I mean, what's your regimen for kind of taking on a big project like that?
I guess I've always been kind of disciplined in terms of, if I make a commitment and I decide I'm going to do something, I do it. And so in order to do this, I decided, I was going to take 2 weeks, 2 days of every week. So Thursday, Friday, not book appointments, just stay home and do that. And then I would run over into the weekends. And, I just surrender to the commitment is what I often say to people. Like, I say we spend a lot of energy resisting our commitments. And, because often people have noticed that and said, how do you manage to work like that? I have some people call me Robot as a nickname because, I can work those long hours. And I say, well, one of the key things is I don't waste energy resisting a commitment. If I've made a decision to sit down and work, I just sit down and work. And very soon, once you get started, after you've been sitting there for 10 minutes, you suddenly you start getting into the groove. Like, especially with writing, I'll always have a look at what I wrote yesterday, and within a couple of minutes, you're starting to find errors and fix things. And before you know it, you're up and running and off you go. And then it's just about, seeing it through, doing that when you get bored, tired, just doing a reset and keep going.
Wow. I mean, it sounds daunting for someone who hasn't done it. Are you just writing off your own knowledge base, or are you researching, going online, reading? Is that part of the whole package?
That's the one thing that I have to discipline myself to do, because I love just writing and just coming, and then I'm like, I have to go and get a reference for this, so I better just back this up with something. And then it's like, okay, go and get the book out and do the research and go through the discipline. But that's the challenge for me, is to do the disciplined part of the research. But yes, I have done a fair bit of that.
So Neil, I think it would be really prudent maybe to just stop and talk definitions. I know you love giving definitions. What do you mean by personal effectiveness in the case of this book?
So the definition that I've come up with for personal effectiveness is really about having the personal power to achieve optimal performance in service of your most meaningful goals while remaining present and peaceful in the midst of life's turbulence.
Wow.
So there's various components there. Obviously, the personal power. So as soon as you set a goal, you realize there's all sorts of obstacles to that. And so how do you increase your power to achieve the things that you set out? Optimal performance, so being able to, as we say, continue working at a high level. When you have setbacks, being able to recover very quickly, identifying purpose and what really matters to you, and making sure that what you do is in alignment with the bigger picture and where you want to be. And then, of course, the important part for me, which brings in the mindfulness component, is being present and peaceful, because so often we're so focused on the goal that we notice the journey and we stress ourselves out. And if you're going to work your whole life being constantly stressed, is it actually worth achieving that goal that may never even happen at the end of the day anyway? And so being able to really, we understand the thing of it's not about the destination but the journey. We understand that, but to really live that is a different challenge. So I always like to make sure that who we are while we're becoming or working towards that goal is something that is someone who is valuable and making a contribution even while you're on your way to that goal.
It's interesting to look at a very goal-driven kind of model. I mean, I've been listening to some podcasts where people are kind of eschewing the goal thing as something that just creates like a different kind of demand, and that life's too fluid almost to like set on a goal and then drive it, and rather like a more organic thing where you kind of take your life on a more purposeful journey, and right goals emerge. It's like, I guess, more of a Zen kind of approach to that. I mean, what's your sense of that? I mean, have you set goals that halfway through you think like, is this goal still valid?
Absolutely, I agree with that completely, and I think that's one of the biggest shifts that I learned through the coaching journey is, there's this incredible emphasis on goals, and in some ways it can become like a religious cult where, you must be doing something wrong if you're not achieving your goals, and then you try even harder, and it just gets very messy. And then on the other extreme, you've got people like Michael Singer, who wrote the Surrender Experiment, and his whole story is how he never set one goal. All he did was say yes to everything that came into his into his world. And I don't know if have you read that book?
No.
It's phenomenal. I mean, he started out in the 70s and wanting to leave university. He was studying economics to go and meditate because he discovered this voice in his head, and he wanted to live his life not according to his preferences, but according to just responding to what came into his world. And he ended up developing one of the biggest software companies in America, selling his shares eventually for $1 billion or whatever it was. And so that's an amazing story. And he's got a second book, which is called The Untethered Soul, which is the sort of philosophy underlying that. So great story and great philosophy. So that represents the other extreme. And I think the one thing that I try to go for is an integrated approach. We always go, okay, well, if it's not goals, then it must be the absolute opposite. So for me, it's always a both and. It's like you set the goal, and because that gives you direction, it gives you focus, and it helps you to discern what matters and what doesn't matter. However, it can change, and you've always got to decide, am I just having excuses here when I'm giving it up, or am I responding to what's coming into my life and the messages that I'm getting? So I was saying to somebody yesterday, I think my approach is always, if I'm not achieving my goal, I'm always assuming that the feedback I'm getting from life is correct, and that what can I do better or differently? And sometimes that might mean pivoting, approaching it from a different angle, and it might mean adjusting the goal, adjusting the direction that I'm taking.
I'm curious about the central thesis of personal effectiveness. I mean, do you see that as a personality attribute, a cognitive thing, some decision you make? Or, what makes some people, hearing your disciplined thing about writing a book, like suggest to me that there's something in you that's different to other people? I mean, is there some core ingredient that differentiates the people who just drive hard and the people who muddle along?
I think we obviously each have our own natural ability or natural tendency. Some people are more driven in that way, and I do think it's a competence that can be acquired, and one that is important in order to, if you have a look at the studies on the flow state is actually a very active state, and it's the optimal state where everybody wants to be, and it's achieved through activity and having there's very specific criteria. It's about having a particular goal. It's about that the activity must mean something to you, and that it's stretching your skill levels and so on. And so what I find is that what coaching is actually doing is always putting people into the flow state, getting them to activate the key factors that get people into the flow state. And personal effectiveness is a lot around that. It's about understanding what are the motives, how do you get yourself there, and what are the things that stand in your way. So yes, I think everybody can benefit from improving their ability to do that, improving their level of discipline, and will get a more enriched experience out of life. So, and we'll all have our level of that. I think there's some people who are driven too hard, who maybe need to take the foot off the gas a bit, and others who need to kind of get themselves on the page. But I do think that it's a developed competence and one that is valuable in giving you the optimal experience of life.
So I want to get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of that, because I'm trying to imagine it. So like if you're coaching someone who's struggling to get their act together, right? They got big dreams but floundering around. I mean, what's the process you're taking them through in order to galvanize their energy better?
Well, I think the important thing there would always be to test their commitment. So you say you want this, but do you really? Because your actions will always demonstrate your commitment.
Right.
So, or the converse being a commitment is always demonstrated by action. Tony Robbins said, "I never leave the scene of a decision without taking one significant action." And that's to move things forward, but also to prove your commitment. So, if a person isn't doing it, I would say that they're not committed. What they're really committed to is something else, and I'd explore what that something else is. And in uncovering that something else, either we're going to find it and there's going to be something there. Well, actually, what I really want is to be selling flowers in Hermanus, and that's where I should be. Or they will realize then that, coming back to your point, Colleen, that they're sabotaging themselves. And then you could unpack that.
But so you're suggesting once you've kind of sorted out that the commitment is there, then things will automatically fall into place? Or is there still some work that you've got to do to get the person to be more effective? So like I'm saying, it seems to go beyond good intentions. And people could be really committed to getting a degree, writing a book, making a movie, doing those things. They all sound brilliant. I just love the idea of doing it, but something just can't get me going.
I'll come back to that. The commitment is proved by action. So there is no commitment if there is no action.
Right.
So if you have a very strong intention or desire, that's not a commitment. I really want this degree. I really want to get fit. I really want to. But that's just your story. That's your narrative. But what you're actually doing, and it may be true that there's something else you have to do first. You need to put something else in place first, or you need to grow and develop in a certain way. So it could be true that it's, you need to explore what else do you need to get in place to do that. But generally, if it's, as you're saying, if somebody's saying, well, do they need to find some switch in terms of being able to be more disciplined? I would always go back to the commitment first.
So once the commitment's in place, then it's about action. Right, So are you guiding people in here? These are the best course of actions that you need to take, or just start with baby steps. Just get in there. I mean, what's your approach to making it happen?
Again, I think when the commitment is clear, the action becomes obvious
to the person.
So my analogy I always use for this is if you dinner party and you hear two people talking about climbing Kilimanjaro. The next day you go away, you won't have too many new thoughts in your head. You'll go, oh yeah, that's interesting, and off you go. But if you and your best friend are sitting there and you commit that you're going to climb within 6 months, the next day you're going to have very new thoughts in your head. And those are going to be, firstly, what have I done? Secondly, what do I need? What do I need to do? And suddenly all the things that are missing from that obligation or that commitment are going to be apparent to you. I need to get fit. I need to save money. Suddenly you see that hiking store in the mall that you've walked past 100 times but you never noticed. So everything that is not in alignment with a commitment becomes apparent. And then that's when you can trust the intuition. So we talked earlier about trusting what comes in. Then you just deal with what's next. So I often deal with this in a sort of corporate performance thing. I call it letting things surface. So when the definition of the goal is clear, and that's where that serves its purpose, everything that is needed becomes apparent. And so you don't have to write up long lists of to-do lists or whatever. You might do that to kind of just clear your mind. However, the really important stuff will come up for you. Like if you know this project has to be done by the end of the month, when you're driving to work in the morning, everything that's needed to be done is going to be apparent for you. So that's where goals are useful and practical, and where the level of commitment, I also talk about it in a team context where, sometimes you'll get in the corporate thing, a leader will say, well, this happened and we have to find out why and we have to make sure it never happened again. And then I'll say, well, the fact is you caught it. What's the problem? Yeah, but it shouldn't have come up like this. He should have known, or it should never have happened. I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter. The fact is, because everybody was committed to the goal, everything that was not in alignment with that goal came up. It doesn't matter if he found out or she. You can do a check and see, well, is there a better system? But some guys, women, leaders, go into, get carried away with trying to put a process in place to make sure it never happens again. I say, just make sure everybody's attention is sufficiently on the goal, that they're committed, that the goal is clear enough, and stuff will come up, and then you deal with it.
And how do you do that as a leader? How do you get your team committed and focused on the right goals?
Another big question. So I think that again comes down to vision and purpose. So it's about getting people to understand where we're going with this and what are the clear parameters. I've just actually done a team process where that was the real takeout for the leader, was the more clear really getting them to buy into the quality, that it's something greater than them, the levels of performance, who we are as a company, what we stand for, and getting people to buy into that, and then everything else flows from that. So vision and purpose, getting that clear, understood, making sure the values are not just on a plaque, but people understand what they mean, that they're translated, working at that level, and everything else starts to take care of itself.
If you look at your book, how can I use your book as an executive? What's the way through your book? Is it just to read through it, or how do you suggest using it?
So there's two versions. The one is what I will call there's the handbook, which has all of the coaching exercises, and then there's the simple version, which has just the content. And usually that's kind of runs in parallel with content that I would introduce to people if I was going through a coaching program with them. Things like values, things like understanding personality, motivational states, skillful conversations, and so on. And in the executive version, I present the material, the tool, and then I've got a section which is called the executive context, which is basically a 4-page section that explains how you put all of this together in a executive leadership context. So, for example, if we're dealing with values, the one chapter is on values. First, you need to understand your own values and how values relate to yourself and your own decision-making process. So that's the same as it would be in the life coaching version as in the executive coaching version. Then at the end of that is the executive context, which says how do you now translate that into understanding the values of the people in your team? How do you align those values with the values of the organization? So it's first understanding self and then learning how to apply it in that context. And then there's the actual self-coaching version, which is where you would do the exercises related to that. So there's what the session theme, and then it would ask you various questions in terms of how you can learn and apply that theme in your leadership context.
It sounds like a lot of work, and I think it's good work. My next question is that people mostly, especially senior executives, are sitting in meetings all day. How do you manage your time? Would that be something one would learn with personal effectiveness? How do you prioritize and manage time so that you can get all these wonderful big goals done, like you wrote your books? I mean, that was all around commitment and time management.
So, sorry, the question then is, how does one...
Yes, I mean, executives are sitting in meetings all day. There's just no time. This is what we hear so often. Why are you not exercising? I don't have time. Why are you not meditating? There's no time.
So one of the biggest things I find is that it's about working at the right level. So I have this quite a bit. I've had one client go through a PhD, and now I've just talking to somebody else who's also trying to go through that process. And you can imagine that's tremendously stressful on the family life and everything. Often people are working at a level that they shouldn't be working. They should be delegating more. They need to understand that their job as a leader is not to be doing, but to be leading. And that's very difficult. Often in a corporate context, you need to show yourself as having all the answers. You need to look busy. You need to be attending all the meetings. So, I mean, I've just worked with a client, a senior banking executive, who cleared up 30% of the time in his diary for just to be able to think and to be able to spend time with his people, just walk around and just have touch points. And he hasn't lost anything in terms of effectiveness because he's delegated the stuff properly, and he's got the proper checkpoints in place to make sure that happens. And that's often the thing, we're so focused on doing the task, and there's always a transition phase where you've got to go into where you've got to delegate and do the checks and make sure that the delegation, the task is understood, the process is understood, and that it's happening correctly. That always takes a little bit of extra time, and it's avoiding doing that. That means we never get across bridge to the other side of actual effectiveness. So there's always a 3 to 6 month period where it probably takes a little bit more time and effort, but there's a reward on the other side in terms of now you're able to check processes and manage people, and you're no longer diving in and solving every problem and having to attend every single meeting.
So Neil, do you ever find with clients that they're just some that you're just not making headway with? That somehow it gets stuck. You're going around in circles and you're kind of like wondering how to get through an impasse. Does that ever happen, or is that not like part of what you see?
I don't experience that a lot. I think, again, I would always look at commitment in terms of the process. What are we really working towards? And I think my job as a coach is to figure out where a person is stuck and to be able to do that effectively. So the one thing I do find is some people either have come into coaching because they were told to, or there was some, and then they fall off and they just lose interest. The people kind of achieve one or two of the things very quickly. They really believe they've done it for themselves and they don't need the coach, and then they fall off the process as well. So I do experience that to some degree, but getting stuck, I kind of see it as my job to get them through that. So not very often, no.
And then are you interrogating the kind of psychological reasons why people might be getting stuck, or are you looking for just practical ways to get them through it? Where are you, what's guiding you?
I think it's a bit of both, and I wouldn't call myself a psychologist. I have a reasonable understanding, and I can also tell when somebody needs to go for, if there's a real depression issue or something like that where they actually need a clinical diagnosis. I do find there are some factors. I'm thinking of something I just did recently where there's something I've developed around the red zone, what I call the red zone, which is around the Enneagram avoidance area. So we each have our core avoidance. Some people avoid getting, criticism, for example. And when we hit that red zone, that avoidance, I say, it triggers that life and death amygdala hijack response. And that's because when we learnt that behavior at 4 and 5 years old, it was like life and death. So if breaking the rules got you into trouble in the family, well, you need to stay in that family to survive. You can't look after yourself. So it's a life and death matter that you don't break the rules. So when that is reconstellated, then that triggers. And what I show people is that because that's occurring as a life and death matter, that's how you need to treat it. And so I'll bring in a mindfulness practice, like actually stopping yourself. And what I get them to do is identify their indicator. Like there's always a key word or phrase that we use that either in our mind internally or externally that we actually say that, like they're lying to me. I've had that experience once before where, that was the person's, and you recognize when he says that, then that's his indicator. And when people get their phrase and they hear themselves saying it, it stops them in their tracks, and then they presence themselves and then start to treat the situation as it is and not as they are. And so I use that a lot, and in fact I've got shared it with some psychologists who find it tremendously valuable as well. And people often think it's very simple, but it's highly effective. So I always look for that, but then sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's just it's an effectiveness thing. So yes, recently I had someone who suddenly started getting very nervous symptoms when in a meeting, and I looked at it and I tested it a little bit, and I realized, it's not a psychological issue. It's just this thing of, we're always in this agitated state. We're always trying to do the task, and we never step back from it. So when he was going into meetings, it was like there wasn't even a 2-minute break. It was like off the desk and straight into the meeting. And obviously, the reason why you're so focused on the task is because you're in that fight or flight mode. You've got to get it done. And then you go into the meeting, and that's activating even more. So, there's just a simple thing of taking the time. And sometimes it's, 2 minutes of just breathing, focusing, preparing yourself for the next meeting. It breaks that whole cycle, and you can reset yourself. But we don't do that. We just go from one thing to the next. And we've become, we've got all this technology that's supposed to save us time, and made it worse.
One of the questions that I was asked to ask you was around procrastination. How does your book address, does it give you ideas of how you can understand why you're procrastinating?
I haven't addressed it particularly as a topic. I would always come back to what I've discussed before, is the commitment issue. And I would also say, in fact, the one chapter, which is something that I've defined, is what I call the motivational states. And I talk there about, there's 5 motivational states. The state of flow we mentioned, which is where you always want to be. And then there's the state of rest, which is what we need and don't get enough of. When we spend too long in the state of rest, then we drop down into what I call NUI, that flat, meh, bored state where you don't feel like doing anything. Sunday afternoon, second week of holiday, whatever. It's always very difficult to get from there back into where we want to be, the flow state. And the only way to do it is get through what I call the animation state, which is that where you're getting going. So it's like when you start out on your run and you're a bit stiff, or you open the computer on Sunday afternoon, you feel a bit grumpy. But 10 minutes in, you're always going to feel more energized than when you started out. And that will ultimately get you into the flow state. And I do, as I said, so what we often do, I've just done a blog series on this as well, is about, we think that we have to wait for our feelings to be right before we can take action. So I don't go to gym because I need to feel like doing it, or I don't do this because I need to feel like it. And what we should be looking at is our motivational state, which is degree of energy and engagement. So things like, is my attention captured by what I'm doing? Am I sitting mulling about problems, or am I focused on an outcome? Is my heart rate, is my energy and attention better than what it was 20 minutes ago? And so I always say, you've got to just get started, and then in 10 minutes time measure your motivational state. Not how you're feeling, not whether you like the task or not, not whether you like your boss or not whether you like your work or this or that. Are you motivated right now? And then take that evidence and build a case for doing it again. Next time you're sitting there, you'll remember, last time I got up and went for that run or did those emails, I felt better afterwards. I was more charged. I started my Monday. I felt a lot better on Monday. I give a talk on this called Making Monday Great Again. And it's about, building a case for yourself so that you become more connected to your motivational state, and you recognize that action will get you through there, rather than being linked to your feelings and waiting for your feelings to change. What you find is that your feelings will eventually fall in line with your motivational state. When people are getting into depression and melancholy, especially your Enneagram 4 type, I always say to them, if you haven't solved the problems of your problems or the world's problems after 20 minutes, go and wash the dishes. Simple task. And then check how you feel afterwards, your motivational state afterwards, and then go to the next task and the next task, and take yourself through the day. So you can allow yourself 20 minutes a day of mulling about and feeling sorry for yourself. And if you haven't reached any great conclusion after that, go and do something.
Yeah, Mel Robbins always says, have you watched Mel Robbins? She's got quite a cool channel. She's also a coach, and she always says, you're just never going to feel like it. So don't wait for a sense that you feel like doing it, because that's very misleading.
Exactly. So that's what I mentioned in the beginning. I said about surrendering to the commitment. And people often say, well, because you can use assertion and force, and some people are more aggressive and that works for them better. But for many people, that doesn't work so well. And surrender, I find, it's kind of like when you just slide under the excuses and you find yourself doing the activity before you heard them. Bruce Fordyce, the marathon runner, used to say that when he was training, he would run to the second lamppost before he made the decision whether to run or not that day. And then he was already out there.
But then you're out there.
Out there. Yeah. So it's like that. It's like get into action before you listen to your story, and then when you're finished, measure your motivational state and build a case for doing it again. And it becomes easier and easier until eventually, like when I feel at my worst, just keep going with the activity that I'm doing. Send those emails, do a bit of stuff, and you check yourself in 20 minutes, you're like, oh yeah, it's starting to lift, okay. After an hour, you're like, fine.
Interesting. Neil, we've spoken a lot about the demands that people put on themselves and driving for success and all the personal effects and stuff, but it sounds like there's another whole component to your book, which is really about balancing that with mindfulness and balancing it with the other part of life, which is giving yourself the rest and whatever it is. I mean, how does that work? What's the formula there?
Yeah, I think we probably don't need we need a reasonable amount of rest, not always as much as we think. And it's about really just taking that rest and understanding the difference between, rest and too much rest. And in fact, I find for me, I find being in a steady work state is it's kind of restful almost, It's because I'm getting stuff done and I'm not getting into a state of agitation. I'm not overdoing it. Just running at that even pace, and then when I rest like, okay, here's 2 hours. I'm going to completely go and lie down and do nothing, or watch a movie, or do something. So it becomes complete
and intentional.
Yeah. So not having your mind on, like I had a client as well recently, also exactly this, and he was going on 2 weeks leave. I said, when you go there, realize nothing could happen. The world's not going to end, that kind of thing. And really be intentional with being with your kids, being on holiday, resting completely. And then he came back and he loved it. It was because he hadn't spent half his foot in, half his time in the email, checking emails. It was total rest.
Well, I think there's a lot of pressure to be seen to be very committed and responding. It's like almost people wear it with the badge of honor.
Totally.
Yeah. And you and I both work in organizations like that, where taking lunch away from your desk is seen as having a half day at work. And there's that banter that surrounds it.
Yeah. I think that's a very important point, and it's one of the reasons I mentioned earlier why do leaders end up being so stressed, because we feel we have to show that we know stuff. I actually have a section on that called the courage it takes to lead, and part of it is pretending to not know, so that you get people to think for themselves. Taking time out to reflect strategically instead of always looking busy. And we pay lip service to those things. We have chill rooms and that, but nobody uses them because, God forbid, I should be seen there doing nothing.
That's embarrassing.
And in fact, they've found that smokers often have better productivity because they take that little 20-minute break. That's not an excuse to stay smoking.
That's not an excuse.
What we're trying to do is get you to do, I don't know, go and take a walk around. I actually do that. It's like just take a mindful walk for 20 minutes, pay attention to your environment, or go and just do something that breaks the whole thought pattern. And during that time, notice what comes up. That's the next most important thing. And then, make sure that that's done, and everything else is secondary.
Do you commit time every day to meditation or mindfulness? Or
I do have a commitment, and I guess my actions don't always do.
Are you committed?
Yeah, exactly. So I go through phases, as anybody does. I meditate. I get up in the morning and I do stretches and exercises. I go to gym 3-4 times a week. I run and I do meditate. And I'd say there's times when I'm very disciplined for long periods, and then you kind of get busy or you just fall off, and then it's always about how quickly do you get yourself back. So recently during the winter we were moving house and it was just chaos, so I just didn't go to gym for probably 6 weeks. But the thing was, as soon as I saw the opportunity, okay, we settled now, let's just go back. So I always have my gym bag when I get home. I pack it for the next time. So and when I leave I put it in the car. So if there's a gap, then I go. So I make those. So I have 2 disciplined times when I always go: Saturday morning, Sunday evening, and then I look for the gap during the week to go. And I kind of try to hit it 80%. And same with the meditation and the morning stretches. Again, it comes and goes in phases, but I always try and tend towards getting it done, 60 to 80% of the time.
I think what you do well, I think this is what I've noticed about you, is that you also build mindfulness in just to the way you live. So how you are in the traffic and, all your interactions seem to incorporate mindfulness.
Except when I'm watching sport.
Oh, no.
I've been known to lose
the cricket.
But that's very good practice, actually. It's like, how do you watch the World Cup cricket or Springboks without being reffed by Jerome Garces or something like that, without completely losing it? So that's That's a good challenge. And sometimes it's nice to just completely deliberately say, you know what, I'm going to just get stuck in and enjoy this and experience the emotion of it. And I'm aware that I'm doing it. And you know what, I'm going to let it happen. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it.
What's the message you're going to tell your closest friends, your children, anybody around, what they should do differently to that you should have done? You know what I mean? I think I haven't expressed that right.
Yeah.
You know, what's the message you want to give them to do differently that you could have done, that you wish you had known, maybe?
That goes into a sort of deeper thing, but I would say, so I was on the crazy side. I actually said it to somebody yesterday. Somebody has this line, crazy always wins. And I said, you know what? Crazy doesn't always win. We've had this as a big trend where, you know, the extroverted and the creative but actually the people who've won are very often the plodders. There's a reason why that story of the tortoise and the hare exists. You know, the people who've stayed very grounded, you know, if you look at the career-wise and investment-wise, you know, Warren Buffett is very conservative. He plays to a very strict formula and he doesn't deviate. It's a very conservative formula. I've got one or two guys who were at school with me who are, you know, CEO of banks and stuff like that. And they were the quiet, grounded, you know, they stuck to it. I was on the other extreme when I was younger. I went on the crazy journey. And I sometimes have friends from that time who send messages like, oh, we did this and we did this. And I'm like, you know what, I wish I'd had somebody telling me at that time that wasn't the way. You know, that a more grounded approach would be better. And so if it was, I would say that, like, you know, stay grounded. Allow yourself to be cautious when you need to. It's having that blend. You know, don't let being cautious own you, but also don't be crazy reckless. You don't have to be something that you're not. If you find yourself being that, then be it and work to your formula that works for you.
What would, just back to the personal effectiveness now, let's just say I've done your course, I've read your book, and I'm just doing so well. What would I see happening in my life if I was more effective?
I would say things like, so I've defined various characteristics that show up in personal effectiveness. So being authentic, that is being able to show who you are, flaws and all, and being who you committed to be. There's a whole thing around there about honesty versus authenticity. But being authentic is about being who you committed to be. So you would learn to become that, which is then overcoming your own negative self-sabotaging stories or the expectations people have of you and understanding who you are in certain situations. It's naturally successful, so actually achieving your goals. I would say confidence is a key thing, and confidence in the sense that of like self-efficacy. So when you do what you say you're going to do and you achieve things, it builds a level of self-belief that, you know, because whenever you set a goal, you set yourself in opposition to the world. There's a simple one as, you know, going to gym 3 times. Suddenly you're in opposition with your friends, your family, all the other things that stand in your way. When you manage to do that and move those obstacles out the way, you build self-belief. So that's a core one, is that confidence. I would say caring as well. So I haven't seen anybody who develops along this path who becomes less caring. They usually become aware of how they can be more caring and have greater empathy towards people. Confident, I've mentioned. Conscious, so being more self-aware. And so I think peaceful as well would be another one, is no matter what's going on around you, that you can maintain that equanimity and just see that nothing is ever the end of the world, and it's not good or bad. There's, you know, I had a problem just the other day, in fact, where I took my car in for a service and it came back and it was leaking oil. So I took it back in and they realized they made a mistake and they tried to correct it. And then they made another error, and so I had to take it back. And eventually they ended up finding 3 or 4 more things that needed to be fixed. But because they felt so bad, they ended up doing it for me. And so by not losing it with them, but just keep taking it back and saying, look, it's not quite right, I ended up getting, you know, a few thousand rands worth of work done that I didn't have to pay for, because, you know, so there's nothing is ever wrong. You know, it's like, so being peaceful and powerful in that sense, recognizing nothing's ever wrong. What's the opportunity in this situation? What do I need to ask for? And, you know, just staying in that mode of keep asking. then you don't have to get into that reactive state.
You'll need to define that word again, equanimity.
Yeah, so equanimity is the ability to be with things as they are. So we always, there's in mindfulness we always talk about future and past. That's one thing. But then the other thing is, so you can be present, but you can be very present and dissatisfied. Life is miserable, or this is happening, this is wrong, this is bad. We always have those judgments, good and bad, right and wrong. And yet we're never actually very good judges of whether something is actually good or bad, right or wrong. As in the example I've just given, something happens, says it's wrong. Let's wait and see where this might lead. And so it's about the ability to be with things as they are, not judging them as good or bad. And we always think that we have to control outcomes. Like if I don't do it, nobody will. But when you practice equanimity, you realize that life is always changing by itself anyway, and most things take care of themselves. So your job is to decide which one needs your attention and when, and then act on that. And that's another one for effectiveness. I find there's a quote that I use with a guy, funny enough, his name is Gupta, Rajat Gupta, and he was the CEO of McKinsey, global CEO of McKinsey, so some irony there, but hopefully that doesn't discredit his message, that he says he knows that 9 out of 10 problems solve themselves, and his job is to decide which one needs his attention. He says he finds that a degree of passivity is better than premature aggression in solving any problem. And leaving things as long as possible in the cycle. So that's again with executives discovering that, where they realize that if there's a clear enough goal, enough commitment, everyone's attention is on it, it's going to get sorted out. I don't have to do everything. That in itself can free up a lot of time, energy, and attention.
Well, I do have to just attest to you living what you're talking about now, because this is not the first time you came in for this episode. We did have a mishap in getting the recording happening, and just the way that you handled it, you kind of, well, let me see, can I help you? What can we do? And I really appreciated that about you, Neil, that you do walk your talk. So
great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It feels like we're winding up a little bit, but I just wanted to check in around effectiveness in families. Is that ever something, is that different? Is it the same? How do you apply it in kind of just being an effective family unit?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think so. I think I've had a relationship with my son. He's been overseas since he was 14. He's now 20. We managed to maintain a very good relationship just through, I think when he was younger, it's like, why do I have to talk to dad every second or third day on Skype or on the weekends? And I just maintained that practice without judging. And eventually now I'm like his biggest buddy. If he's got any decision or any question, it's like, what do you think of this? So we have a very good relationship as a result of that contact. And not judging or making anything wrong. Just seeing, okay, this is how it is. How are we going to manage that situation? And so, I've currently with somebody and have 2 teenage stepchildren, and there's so where Luke left at 14, I gained them at 14. So Clint always says to me, "You didn't miss out. You're getting that." So again, I find just it's been a really great, rewarding process going through that and applying a lot of the principles here, like the way you would have a leadership conversation with somebody, finding out about their thinking first, not making them wrong, and validating them. And so it's been, I would say I've applied all of it equally at home as I would in the workplace.
Is there another book in that?
There should be, yeah.
Can I ask another question?
You may.
And it's just a quick one. I mean, what's the book you think everybody should read?
Can I have 2?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I would say The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz.
Okay.
Agree.
If you had to take just that and nothing else, you would probably improve your life significantly.
Yeah.
And the second one I would say is, I'm just doing a quick check here, I would say A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle.
Okay. Yeah.
We're in the same WhatsApp group.
So, okay. Yeah. Because I got that many years ago, like 10 odd years ago and read it. And then I got the audio. In fact, someone gave me a weekend workshop that he did, an audio of a weekend workshop, and I started listening to it. What I've done for many years is just I put stuff, my auto play on and let it just play randomly through songs. And it's a good training for equanimity.
Yeah.
Because if you don't like a song, you have to, you listen through it. So you develop you give up the preference. And if you like something, you don't go and play it again, you just let it go. And so it's a good practice for equanimity. And I got this workshop, but then also A New Earth on audio, put it on. And so I've been listening to that nonstop for 10 years.
Wow.
And it has had such a profound effect on my life. And there's not one, he totally gets it, not from a theoretical point of view, but from a what is perspective. If you understand the meaning of presence and equanimity, and then you take everything off that platform, what that means in all areas of your life and different applications, he just so gets it. So although his voice is very soporific and some people can't bear to listen to him, but if you really understand that book,
and he also doesn't mind if you don't like his voice, because he talks so much about ego and not getting hooked by all of that stuff. I know I have a teenage daughter who we cannot actually go through one song, because she'll just listen to the first bit and skip to the next one, because now she's bored with that song, so it's time to move on. And it sounds a little bit like Stoicism, around just learning to suffer a bit.
Totally, yeah. Well, the Stoic philosophy is it's not the thing itself, but your relationship to the thing that determines your happiness. So it's completely, that's equanimity. That's what it is, yeah.
Also just learn to live in discomfort, because it's okay. Yeah, sure.
So where would we, I wanted to ask you around your experience with online learning and the online self-coaching. How's it been? How have people reported on it? Are they enjoying it?
Yeah, I've had really great feedback from the people who have signed up. And I think people still aren't quite used to the idea, or they still want the personal touch. So what I've done is I've created some contact points so people can submit questions, submit their responses for me to check on. They can book a bolt-on session if they want to just have some FaceTime. But generally, the response has been really, really good. The questions that are coming through are really smart. It shows that they're understanding the content. So, it's been
And where would we find that content in your books?
So everything is available through the website, neilbierbaum.com. The online courses are there. The books are available there in paperback for South Africa. Then if you want the ebook, there's a link there that will take you to Amazon. And then the rest of the world is paperback and ebook via Amazon. So Amazon now has a service where they produce paperback, very good quality paperback, single copies, delivered, according to whatever Amazon program you're on. And so that's fantastic, because I've started selling a couple of these in the States and getting royalty checks. So that's very nice.
That's amazing. That's another whole topic of self-publishing, which you've just been through. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Good. Any last closing thoughts?
No, I think thanks, Neil. That's been really enlightening.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, Neil, I think, again, just to really reiterate that this is a great achievement, what you've done. And I know you sort of seem to be able to write easily, but I'm in awe of your commitment.
Great.
I'm in awe of every author, actually. It's just, I think it's a real achievement to pull off a book.
Great.
So,
and thank you.
Thank you, and thanks so much for your support and having me here talk about it.
Yeah, it was wonderful to chat to you again.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a wrap for today. We really hope you enjoyed the show. For more info about Neil and his new book on personal effectiveness, please visit the show notes. And a big thank you to Collis, our very patient producer.